Hey everybody, I'm here to talk to you about another grimoire or apocryphal text. This time we're going to take a look at a book out of the Apocrypha that I feel is very relevant with what the Pope is about to do in the Vatican next week. This book is entitled the Book of Jubilees, and a Jubilee year is about to happen, which is why the Vatican is going to open a tomb with incantations, and anyone who knows anything knows that this is symbolic and quite, well, relevant. So, the Book of Jubilees was composed somewhere around 460 BC, and the Book of Jubilees is an apocryphal retelling of the events from the Book of Genesis and Exodus, presented as an angel's revelation to Moses as Moses ascends Mount Sinai. It was composed in the 2nd century BCE, and it divides its history into periods of 49 years, hence the title Jubilees, which in a biblical context refers to the end of a 49-year period. It also provides dates for biblical events. Some parts of the book are in line with biblical narratives, but there are other parts that have some additional information and even gaps or some alternative explanations to biblical stories and laws. The Book of Jubilees, Chapter 1. This is the history of the division of the days of the law and of the testimony of the events of the years, of their year, weeks, of their jubilees throughout all of the years of the world, as the Lord spake to Moses on Mount Sinai when he went up to receive the tables of the law and of the commandment, according to the voice of God, as he said unto him, Go up to the top of the mount. And it came to pass in the first year of the Am meaning Anno Mundi, exodus of the children of Israel out of Egypt in the 3rd month, on the 16th day of the month, that God spoke to Moses, saying, Come up to me on the mount, and I will give thee 2 tables of stone of the law and of the commandment which I have written, that thou mayest teach them. Here you can see the amount of chapters. We have 50 chapters here. And this is from Safari, with some of the resources used. Of course, these are wiki up here, but down here you can see sacred text is used on this one. The Book of Jubilees, probably written in the 2nd century BCE, is an account of the biblical history of the world from creation to Moses. It is divided into periods called Jubilees of 49 years. For the most part, the narrative follows the familiar account in Genesis, but with some additional details such as the names of Adam and Eve's daughters and an active role for a demonic entity called Mastema. The anonymous author had a preoccupation with calendar reform and uses Jubilees as a platform for proposing a solar calendar of 364 days and 12 months. This would have been a radical departure from the Jewish calendar, which is lunar-based. There are also a couple of messianic apocalyptic passages, although quite a bit less than the Book of Enoch. The only complete version of Jubilees is in Ethiopian, although large fragments are in Greek, Latin, and Syriac are also known. It is believed that it was originally written in Hebrew. If at times one gets the impression that you are reading a first draft of Genesis, you are in good company. R.H. Charles, the translator, a distinguished academic biblical scholar, concluded that Jubilees was a version of the Pentateuch written in Hebrew, parts of which later became incorporated into the earliest Greek version of the Jewish Bible, the Septuagint. The Book of Jubilees, or as it is sometimes called, the Little Genesis, purports to be a revelation given by God to Moses through the medium of an angel, the angel of presence, and containing a history divided up into Jubilee periods of 49 years, from the creation to the coming of Moses. Though the actual narrative of events is only carried down to the birth and early career of Moses, its author envisages the events of a later time, and in particular certain events of special interest at the time when he wrote, which was probably in the latter years of the 2nd century BC. In the reign of the Maccabean prince John Hyrcanus, though distinguished from the Pentateuch proper, the first law, it proposes and supplements the latter. The actual narrative embraces material contained in the whole of Genesis and part of Exodus, but the legal regulations given presuppose other parts of the Pentateuch, especially the so-called priest code, and certain details in the narrative are probably intended to apply to events that occur in the author's own time, the latter years of the 2nd century BC. The author himself seems to have contemplated the speedy inauguration of the Messianic age, and in this respect his point of view is similar to that of the apocalyptic writers, but his work, though it contains one or two passages of an apocalyptic character, is quite unlike the typical apocalypses. It is largely narrative based upon the historical narratives in Genesis and Exodus, interspersed with legends and emphasizing certain legal practices such as the strict observance of the Sabbath, circumcision, etc., and laying much stress upon the eternal obligation, but his main object was to inoculate a reform in the regulation of the calendar and festivals, and in place of the intercalated lunar calendar, which he condemns in the strongest language, he proposes to substitute for this a solar calendar consisting of 12 months and containing 364 days. The result of such a system is to make all the festivals, except the Day of Atonement, fall on a Sunday. The author also fixes the date of the Feast of Weeks, Pentecost, on Sivan 15th in the place of the traditional Sivan 6th. He obviously believes that the prevailing system has produced grave consequences in religious practice. The observance of the feast, which had been prescribed by the divine authority, is, according to his view, rendered impossible so long as the right principles for regulating the calendar are ignored. These principles are justified from the written law and are represented as been ordained in heaven. To what party or tendency in Judaism did the author belong? Various answers have been given to this question, which will be fully discussed below. It is very difficult to believe, as Dr. Charles contends, that the author was a Pharisee, for positions he advocates are in many respects fundamentally opposed to later Pharisaic practice. In particular, how can any member of the Pharisaic party, which from its beginning championed popular religious custom, have advocated a solar calendar? More can be said. The view that the author was a member of the Hasidim, or pious, who must not be confounded with the Pharisees. While in a recent important discussion, Lesenzinski has made out a strong, if not quite convincing case for Sadducean authorship, the book has sometimes been styled a midrash, but such a descriptive term needs some qualification and claims to be a revelation and not a mere exposition of Genesis and Exodus. At the same time, there is a certain midrashic tendency observable in the way the author rewrites the older narratives, which reminds one of the work of the chronicler as compared with the earlier canonical books which he remodeled. But Jubilees is not at all like the typical midrash of the later rabbinical period. It is more independent and resembles rather such works as the Chronicles of Jerahmeel, or earlier narrative part of the Apocalypse of Abraham. The book, which was probably composed in Hebrew, is divided into 50 chapters and appears to be complete. So the Jubilees basically are how they marked time and important events, and that is the reason why what the Vatican is doing on Christmas Eve is important, because it actually measures up with a Jubilee year. And while they say that they open this vault every 25 years, which would be, estimating 50 years, half of the amount of time of an actual full Jubilee, if you take the 49 years and you go back, then you'll see when the last time would have been. You can compare what was happening in the calendar now to then and see what calendar events were important and what different things have happened every year within those 49 years. And it's all about symbology, honestly. So, like, they're saying that he's going to be opening the tomb of Lucifer, but anybody who knows anything about this knows that Lucifer's not entombed. He hasn't died, so he's not imprisoned in that. It's just the name of the vault. And then beside it is St. Peter's tomb. So these different vaults and what there is within them and what is going to be released within them for what amounts to be the 12 days of Christmas is unleashing something unto the world, and whatever that is going to be allowed to do in the world for that time, it will be opened to them to do, and then it will be closed again. And it's important because